It's 15:06 GMT. This is Bola Mosuro with Focus on Africa from the BBC World Service. And we start in Somaliland. Those were shots fired in the cities of Erigavo and Burao last night in the self-declared Republic of Somaliland. It happened as people poured out into the streets, some to vent their frustration and others, according to reports, to celebrate the official end of President Musa Bihi Abdi's term of office. However, the fact that shots were fired signifies a worrying development in Somaliland, which for many years has been synonymous with stability and development. The root of the problem is the president has refused to step down after the end of his mandate, which was officially last night, and to hold scheduled elections. While Parliament instead extended his mandate by 2 years, but opposition parties are having none of it. I asked Mahmoud Adam Jamagalal, who's the Shadow Minister of Information for the opposition Wadani Party, why they're refusing and we now regard him as illegitimate.
No, we don't recognize Musa Bihi as president of the Republic of Somaliland as of yesterday. The reason is the former president, Musa Bihi, in our view, he's the former president, has failed in his duty under the constitution to carry out elections. Article 83 of the Somaliland constitution places a duty on him to carry out elections. Instead of carrying them out, he's actually frustrated the process. He has deliberately manipulated the former electoral commission, and we don't view the extension as a legal one because there are only certain circumstances where an extension may be given. So that is the position of the Wadani Party, which is by far the largest party in Somaliland. In the 2017 presidential elections, Wadani gained 42% of the popular vote. Since then, there has been a huge shift in public opinion due to the president's failure to address the real needs and issues and problems that we have in the country, problems of poverty. In addition to that, there has been the manipulation of the legal system. So for those reasons, we don't recognize him as president.
Yesterday, there were actually celebrations in parts of Somaliland with people gathering in Burko, for instance, to support your party, Wadani, but also to see the man that they say should be out have ended his term. However, the forces opened fire in order to disperse these people. What would you say to the security forces? Because I understand you've been asking even the army to follow the president's orders.
Basically, what happened last night were spontaneous feelings of people exhibiting their feelings of frustration at the attack on democracy and the president's failure to carry out elections. These were peaceful gatherings. People were venting their anger, and the police shot at some of these people. We can't even call them protesters, but indiscriminately. We have been saying all along to our supporters and the general public to keep calm, to respect law and order, and if they need to protest peacefully. And people have been adhering to that. Security forces have been using really draconian measures in order to quell public gatherings, which are a right given under the Constitution. So our message would be, say, to the police and all security forces to refrain from harming innocent civilians, and we hope they adhere to that.
Your self-declared Republic of Somaliland has been one that has been held up as a real testament to democracy, to peace and stability over the past few years. However, that has changed over the past couple of months, and we saw deadly clashes in August. Is your stance not risking that political stability?
That's a very good point. Somaliland is renowned for peace, stability, and democracy. It's a beacon of light in the Horn of Africa. But that's before Musa Bihi came into office. All that has changed since the former president, in our view, and his government took office. Things have really taken a turn for the worse. We believe people have their right to protest, their right to free speech. Since Musa Bihi came into power is the illegal detention of journalists and reporters have been kept, arrested arbitrarily and detained and then released at their pleasure. That's the situation. Everything has taken a turn for the worse as the Watani Party is. We don't recognize him and we don't recognize his cabinet. We recognize the parliament and the other institutions, and we need an urgent turn of events to prevent Somaliland sliding into a very, very serious crisis.
Mahmoud Adam Jamagalal there, who's the Shadow Minister of Information for the Wadani Party in Somaliland. Well, listening to that in the studio is our BBC Africa editor, Mary Harper. Mary, he spoke there about the situation being so dire, and how much of a threat is this to the stability that we've known Somaliland for this time?
Yeah, what is surprising and distressing, really, in that Somaliland has been a self-declared independent territory for more than 30 years. And people from all walks of life, whether they're in politics, in business, no matter what, they're saying that this is the most serious threat to Somaliland's stability since it really first came into being. So it is a very, very serious crisis. And this has been going on, as you said, since August, when at least 5 people were shot dead in these violent protests. And I think there's various things that make it more problematic. One is that this president and his administration, he was a former rebel fighter, and he, in a way, he's never really moved on from that very, very militaristic approach. And people say he's very stubborn, he's not going to give any way. And also the 2 opposition parties right now, they formed an alliance, and also they got the majority in the last legislative election, so they're more powerful than before. So it's like both sides are becoming more polarized, and that neither side really is willing to budge, and it is scary, in fact, where this might end.
And when you hear Mr. Galal saying that, since Musa Abdi has come to power, there has been no peace and there has been no stability, is that quite right, or is there something else that's kind of at the root of the current crisis that we see? Is it the elections and the fact that they didn't hold when they were supposed to?
Yes, it's more to do with the elections. I mean, Musa Bihi has been in power for a few years, and the country, the territory didn't fall apart straight away. And the problem is, number one, is that these elections, his term ended November the 13th yesterday, and they've now been extended by 2 years. But also there's a whole complicated political process whereby only 3 political parties are allowed to compete for legislative and presidential elections. And they're meant to go through this process to choose which 3 parties will be the ones that can run in the sort of big elections. And the timetable of that has also been delayed. So the whole kind of political process of Somaliland is in a total mess. And until they can get that running again, the whole really rather sophisticated democracy that they have operating there is going to be in a state of, it's going to be frozen.
And one of the things that the opposition have said is that they've tried to appeal to traditional clan leaders, for instance, and elders in Somaliland to try and resolve it. Are they the ones who can do it, or are we now looking at, is it international mediation that would be the only thing that can solve this?
Well, since this political stalemate developed several months ago, the business community came up with a very sort of organised plan, and it looked like they were going to get somewhere because the business community is incredibly powerful in Somaliland. In the end, that fell apart. You've had the clan elders who are also incredibly powerful. That hasn't worked. You've had civil society organisations, the religious elders, etc. And none of them have got anywhere. Also, behind the scenes, there's been diplomatic efforts from the UK, the US, the UAE. But one of the problems is that President Bihi doesn't want to listen to them. He really shuts them down. So everybody who's tried to mediate hasn't got anywhere.
And what about regional forces like IGAD, for instance? Could it be an African solution that we're now maybe looking towards or may turn to?
It's complicated, partly because Somaliland isn't recognised. So in terms of its membership of those kind of organisations, it doesn't have that. But what is worrying is that in the whole Horn of Africa, Somaliland is the most stable and democratic area. So if Somaliland falls apart, it's a bit like what happened with Ethiopia. Then the whole region is just in turmoil. There's no kind of rock of stability there at all.
Mary, thank you very much indeed. Our BBC Africa editor, Mary Harper, and talking about Ethiopia and how the war there in Tigray region for the past 2 years has affected what's happened across the Horn and the rest of the continent. We do head now to ask a question that has reverberated from Tigray, where the war has been in existence for the past 2 years and around the continent. And that is, has a genuine peace deal actually been signed to end the war in the northern region of Ethiopia? Now, the question arises because some Tigrayan officials have now disowned the peace agreement, which was signed after closed-door talks between the Ethiopian government and Tigrayan officials in Pretoria. They claim they weren't represented at the African Union moderated talks. The parties had agreed on Saturday that immediate and unhindered humanitarian access would be able to start in order to help millions who are in desperate need of food and medical supplies. Well, Redwan Hussein, who's the National Security Advisor to Ethiopia's government, spoke of the challenges in finally getting the deal over the line.
The biggest challenge was mistrust. We have been through 3 rounds of conflict and a number of issues. There are accusations, counter-accusations, and so there was a deep mistrust. So we had to engage back and forth and also iron out the issues of concern for both sides. That's one aspect. So bridging the gaps so that we can narrow the gaps and come on the same page. That's one aspect. The other aspect is expectations from constituencies of both sides. So government has its own constituency, and also the other party has its own constituency. So we had to work out, iron out issues which might give a wrong impression. So for that, we had to keep on coming every document and polish it further so that it wouldn't have an implication which might not help for the peace process to hold. So it was in good phase, but it was actually challenging. So this was meant to be an execution plan as per the agreement, which was agreed last time. That was political one, the heaviest one, the difficult one was that. Once you reach a certain page on the political one, this one is a security in the military aspect to execute that plan, but in a more realistic way, because commanders would know what is difficult and what is actually easily achievable. So it should have been easier, but because there was a carried over mistrust from the onset, and then we have to, stay together and make communications back and forth and iron out issues could be of concern for either of us. And I think that was basically what took us so long. But luckily, we are now through. Then it's incumbent upon both of us to stay committed, and again to manage expectations and also misunderstandings and misrepresentations. But again, a lot of vested interests here and there that might face obstacles in the face of this agreement. But congratulations for everybody. It is successful.
Redwan Hussein, National Security Advisor to the Ethiopian government. But were those congratulations premature? And is it that the Tigrayan officials and the Tigrayan rebels weren't speaking with one voice? Well, joining me now on the line is my colleague from our Tigrinya service, Hailu Saleh. Afternoon to you, Hailu. So take us through who exactly is now standing apart and saying, despite what we heard Redwan Hussein saying, actually, we didn't sign this document.
Thank you very much. 2 days ago, the TPLF came out with a presser that asks a correction on 2 points from the Pretoria Agreement. Those points are, one, it says we don't have combatants because it has been told that TPLF combatants will be disarmed. So it said, I don't have combatants that I command. And the second point, and which is actually creating confusion, is that the TPLF did not sign a peace deal. So it is saying that the ones in South Africa representing Tigray are not members of the TPLF, and TPLF is not responsible for that. Rather, the delegate represents the government of Tigray, which is ruling the region. And yesterday we spoke to Getachew Reda, a spokesperson for the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, and the head of the delegation, he said also the same thing. We are not signing this agreement on behalf of TPLF, but on the government of Tigray. He said they were forced by the Ethiopian government to call themselves as TPLF because the Ethiopian government doesn't give a credit for the TPLF as a legitimate governing rule, because the Ethiopian government has called null and void the election that was held in Tigray 2 years ago, and which actually triggered the war between both of them. But the most important point is that the TPLF said it supports the peace deal, though not signed by the TPLF, and then will do it is based for the implementation of the peace deal.
However, what this signifies, Hailu, clearly is that there are different factions within the Tigrayan authorities, with those who, as you say, were signing on behalf of the regional government that held the elections, and also the TPLF. And we know that there are other, the TDF as well, that are also Tigrayan Defence Force. So who now is coming out to say they weren't represented, and what do they now want? Do they want another deal to be signed? Do they want different talks where they can sit at the table?
Well, they don't need another deal, and they don't reject the point. The point is that actually they are giving this presser was released in Tigrinya, and as we know, there has been a growing frustration and opposition in Tigray when the Tigrayans saw the agreement was between the Ethiopian government and the TPLF. Many Tigrayans opposed it because they don't accept the TPLF as the sole representative of the Tigrayans. So it seems to kind of give an answer to the people of Tigray that it is not only the will of the TPLF, rather this delegate team consists from different sorts of Tigrayans.
Hailu, and very, very briefly, Getachew Reda has just said on social media about half an hour ago, tweeted that he's back in Mekele, the regional capital. What kind of reception will he get? Will he be welcomed?
Well, many Tigrayans are very happy that the delegates are back home, but still the Tigrayans are between the hope and frustration. They are hoping that the services will be retained, right. Medicine and food will come into Tigray,
Hi.
But they are also worried that the TDF will be disarmed, and they know that they believe they will be left with no one to be cared for. So there are some people hailing that this leadership is back and supporting them, but still on the Tigrayans are still worried what is going to happen next after the TDF is disarmed.
Thank you, Hailu. My colleague Hailu Saleh from our BBC Tigrinya service. And now with time at 15:25 GMT, let's get a roundup of other stories from across the continent with Audrey Brown.
Thank you, Bola. Shortish but sweet. Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo has sacked the country's junior finance minister, Mr. Charles Adu-Boahen, following allegations of impropriety. The minister has been at the center of an expose by a team of undercover journalists investigating alleged corruption in the government. Thomas Nadi reports from Accra.
The minister, Mr. Charles Adu-Boahen, is said to have told the undercover journalists posing as investors that, as a practice, they will have to pay the country's vice president, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, a bribe of $200,000 before meeting him to discuss possible business deals, and that they will have to offer the vice president's relatives some jobs. Vice President Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia has since denied the allegations. The minister has not yet commented publicly on the allegations and his sack. President Nana Akufo-Addo has now asked the country's special prosecutor to carry out further investigations into the allegations.
The Nigerian High Court has thrown out the case of terrorism and treason charges against the separatist leader Nnamdi Kanu. Justice Binta Nyako made the decision after she was informed that Mr. Kanu had already been discharged and acquitted by the Court of Appeal, and that the government is challenging the judgment at the Supreme Court. The BBC's Chris Sewoko sent these details from Abuja.
This morning, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra was expected to face fresh charges after the government said it had amended charges against him, but he was not present in court. Last month, a high court in Umuahia, southeast Nigeria, ordered the Nigerian government to return the detained pro-Biafra separatist leader to the place where he was arrested. Another ruling by the Court of Appeal had earlier discharged him of terrorism charges.
And that, Bola, is what I meant by short and sweet.
And here's me, Audrey, thinking you were talking about the two of us.
Oh, that too.
Audrey Van, thank you very much for that roundup. You're listening to Focus on Africa on the BBC World Service, and we head now to South Sudan, where nearly 1 million people have been displaced following 4 consecutive years of record-breaking rainfall. Swathes of farmland have been submerged, and the United Nations says almost 65% of the population is severely food insecure, with up to 3 million on the verge of starvation. Well, the BBC's Mercy Juma was in the country's Upper Nile state, where hundreds of villages are now completely submerged by the flooding waters.
We are on a speedboat on the River Nile in South Sudan's Upper Nile state. It is a 10-hour journey to Ulang County near South Sudan's border with Ethiopia. We pass by tens of villages completely covered by flooding waters. We have to abandon the boat and walk through swampy fields to get to where the displaced have put up. Nyaruot Kutin, heavily pregnant and due any time now, escaped with her children by using plastic sheets attached to poles to sail down River Nile.
I first had to walk for a long time in the water, supporting myself with a stick. My husband was carrying the kids. My stomach was in pain while I was laying on the makeshift boat. I'm still in pain right now. We have nothing. We lost everything.
Nyaruot and her 4 children are living under a tree on slightly higher ground. Together with thousands of other people, they are in dire need of food, water, shelter, and medical aid. The added problem is arable land used to grow food now lies waterlogged or submerged and unusable.
And that was Mercy Juma reporting from Upper Nile State in South Sudan. In the next edition of the programme, we'll hear an extended version of what she saw in that region. We'll also have Jamie Reid bringing us the latest sports news. Do apologise for not being able to bring it to you in this edition. Do join in, though, for the programme at 1700 GMT. We'll have more sport, more news, and hopefully your comments too.